particularly for voters of color, there is no conversation of interest to talk about uniting, to be blunt. You just do have a certain quarter, maybe third of the country that does not like the idea that we're becoming a more multiracial society where women have a lot of asserted rights. Donald Trump says, you know what, I'll make you the center of attention. You're the center of my attention. And I don't give a damn about the brown people, and I will hurt them for you. And just being black or brown feels dangerous. We can't stay anywhere forever, especially when we've got home security threats in terms of violent white nationalism that's threatening our capital, when we've got our own former president inciting people into violence and pushing them more into this violent white extremism, much the way bin Laden, did, sort of inspiring people to be this way.
The most shameless liar on television today is MSNBC's Joy Reid. And this video was particularly difficult to make simply because of the sheer volume of Joy Reid's lies. But one thing is very clear in watching a lot of Joy Reid. Everything in politics boils down to one thing: racism. No matter the political or cultural issue, the problem is always racism. And because Joy Reid is a one-trick pony whose answer is always the same, she has to shoehorn in racism to every topic, even when it doesn't fit. And the charade becomes more ridiculous by the day, especially when she uses one of her favorite insults, which is comparing conservatives to racist Democrats like George Wallace or Bull Connor.
People like Joe Manchin are casually talking about preserving the artifacts of the Senate from the Jim Crow era. He seems more fixated on holding on to Jim Crow era rules in the Senate than in saving our democracy. And Manchin is being very ostentatious in basically saying, I am more devoted to the old Jim Crow filibuster than I am to voting rights or to anything, to infrastructure for my own state. I don't care. Ted Cruz says a lot of stupid things. He does a lot of stupid things. But I personally, as a person of color, as a black person, am beyond offended that he would dare use the word Jim Crow when his party is literally a Jim Crow party at this point, trying to suppress the votes of people, including in his home state. You work for an organization that has been fighting against Jim Crow and including Jim Crow voting laws, which were specifically designed to stop black people from being able to vote.
No. The Democrats are literally the party of Jim Crow because the Democrats were the one who proposed, passed, and implemented Jim Crow laws, which means Republicans are not literally the Jim Crow party at this point, and they never will be. Then she says, you work for an organization that has been fighting Jim Crow and Jim Crow voting laws. No. There are no such organizations fighting Jim Crow because Jim Crow died. It's been dead for almost 60 years.
Ted Cruz could give a damn about Jim Crow. He's never raised one concern ever in his entire life that I've ever heard about Jim Crow or racism or discrimination.
Ted Cruz doesn't talk a lot about Jim Crow because Jim Crow died almost 60 years ago. It doesn't exist.
Meanwhile, Georgia is going all Jim Crow while another state is making it easier for people to vote. Imagine that. As states across the country race to enact laws to suppress voting, New Jersey did the opposite today. Governor Phil Murphy, joined on video by Stacey Abrams, signed into law a bill expanding early voting, allowing in-person voting up to 10 days before an election. It stands in stark contrast to Georgia's Jim Crow voter suppression law, which faces mounting legal challenges. What Republicans are saying is they're going to make it torture for you to vote in line by having fewer machines, beat-up machines, places where, in urban centers, places where black folks live, suburbs where black people live, make it impossible or torture for you to vote in line. And then they're going to make it impossible for you to vote by mail. They're going to lock off every way that you can vote. And then even if you survive all of those restrictions and you finally get your vote in, then they're going to say, ways out. We're just not going to count what you did because we don't like who you voted for, so we're just going to give it to the other guy. This is the end of democracy in America.
Oh, Republicans are going to make it torture now to wait in line. They're going to lock off every way you can vote, she says. And then if you do vote, they're just not going to count it. And they're going to toss it out because you're black. The problem, you can't incentivize people to vote. You can't bribe them to vote. And what these people do is they bribe people on the street to vote and then put their arm around them and help them vote Democrat.
a Jim Crow relic against Jim Crow and including Jim Crow voting laws from the Jim Crow era. Use the word Jim Crow went to the old Jim Crow filibuster about Jim Crow or racism. Or I guess when President Biden spoke of whether Republicans wanted to be Bull Connor, DeSantis was at home raising his hand. Me, I want to be Bull Connor. To Jim Crow era rules in the Senate. His party is literally a Jim Crow party. When all Jim Crow, Georgia's Jim Crow voter suppression law.
Pretty much every night we've asked supporters of open borders, how can you justify this? Do American citizens benefit from these policies or not? Here's Joy Reid's response. She wasn't joking at all. Watch.
Tucker has been one of the most sort of aggressive at putting forward what a lot of people have seen as a pretty blatantly white nationalist view of what immigration should be like.
So Joy Reid is accusing us of racism. Let's pause for a moment and savor the irony of that. Reid's entire public career has been built on race baiting. Try to watch her show for 20 minutes and see for yourself. After House Majority Whip Steve Scalise was shot and nearly killed by a progressive activist last summer, Reid openly wondered if we should hope for his recovery.
Because he is in jeopardy and everyone is pulling for him, are we required in a moral sense to put that aside at the moment?
So when Joy Reid accuses you of harboring racist thoughts, trust me, it's projection. But it's also a political tactic. Reid can't explain why this country so badly needs to import millions of additional poor people. Nobody on the left can explain that.
For the longest time, because what Donald Trump has done is dismantle that America and replace it with this, with deliberate cruelty to children, with this hideous system that legitimately gets talked about as concentration camps. And that's the debate we end up having, what to call it. But what we're seeing is horror. And the horror is deliberate. You know, I'm going to quote Adam Serwer again. The cruelty is the point. His base wants to see this cruelty to prove to them that he's hurting the right people. This is what they want. And this is what they want to show the world, that we're willing to be as cruel as you could possibly be, maximally cruel to children in order to scare brown people out of coming here. It's horrifying. I've been sleepless watching it happen. And so I'm really hoping. I've been sleepless watching it happen. I've been sleepless watching it happen. I've been sleepless watching it happen. Responding to the demonstrations over George Floyd's murder with punitive new measures intended to discourage protests altogether. In the 2021 legislative session, lawmakers in 34 states have introduced more than 80 anti-protest bills, the vast majority of them drafted by Republicans. And so far, 4 Republican governors have signed the measures into law, including in the state of Florida. And if it wasn't already clear that this is a direct response to the Black Lives Matter protests, Governor Ron DeSantis actually cited the Derek Chauvin trial when he enacted what he's calling an anti-rioting law. These are stunning examples of how Republicans think that they can legislate away your First Amendment right to protest. This is directed at Black Lives Matter. It feels so George Wallace that I'm shocked that George Wallace didn't actually think of it back when he was governor of Alabama.
Oh, this is straight out of the Jim Crow textbook.
Ron DeSantis appears to really want to reenact the entire George Wallace history. I guess he wants to be the modern day George Wallace, because he is enacting a slew of laws that essentially try to make it illegal to protest in the state of Florida.
The bills are not anti-protest bills, they're anti-riot bills, because we saw an entire year of riots across most major cities throughout the United States with billions of dollars in damages and a couple dozen deaths directly related to the riots.
If a president is actively refusing to condemn the violence of documented right-wing potentially domestic terrorism, but constantly harping on Black Lives Matter, none of the activists from Black Lives Matter have been arrested for anything violent. What difference does it make within the movement? What difference does it make as the way the movement is viewed in your view?
Well, let me first say that one of the things that is so incredibly important for people to understand and just to underscore is that this president has refused time and time again to decry white supremacist and white nationalist violence. Is that this president has refused time and time again to decry white supremacist and white nationalist violence.
This is Mikaya Bryant. exhibiting youth and joy. Can you just walk us through how police should act in a case like this? Because, you know, I was saying on my Instagram earlier, I remember fights in even high school or even younger than that, where a kid brought a penknife or something to school and teachers were able to defuse that and they didn't have guns.
But we're talking about a child here that was involved in the altercation with someone else. And yes, I believe there was a weapon. Now, I could not see how the young lady was using the weapon.
And now we have Mikaya Bryant. Joy Reid remembers someone having a penknife in school, so there's no reason to shoot Mikaya Bryant as she tried to stab another girl. Her guests say that there may have been a weapon, but she doesn't know how it was being used. May have had a weapon? They say this like it isn't on video. Any idiot can tell she had a large knife and was trying to stab another girl.
One of the officers who responded to the scene had on a Blue Lives Matter face mask. Social media has shown videos of people yelling at somebody who yells Blue Lives Matter. We don't know whether it was one of the police. But if cops are showing up to the scene of a shooting of somebody and there's people in pink jumpsuits running around and girls, teenage girls running around, and your response to that, given the sensitivities we're in right now on the day of the George Floyd verdict, is to show up in a Blue Lives Matter mask, what message do you think that is sending to the community and to Black people in general?
They had to leave no stone unturned. And if that is the standard, then no Black person is really, truly going to be safe if we cannot be having a bad day, if we cannot defend ourselves when we think we are going to get jumped, if we call the cops and they can't show up and tell who the victim is and who the perpetrators are, and they can't use their training to adjudicate regular old everyday community conflict. But beyond all of that, what are we going to do about the way that we don't understand Black girls as girls? Mikaya Bryant was a child, like Tamir Rice was a child. And the way that she has been talked about as this, because she was a big girl, right? And so people just see her as the aggressor. They don't see her humanity. They have adultified her. We turn Black girls into grown women before they even are able to vote. And then, and are unable to see them as children. And so I have watched folks across the political spectrum really defend this and say, and empathize with the officer, say that he didn't have any other set of choices. What are we training police to do if they are not actually showing up on the scene and making the situation better for all involved? If you can't figure out how to de-escalate a 16-year-old, even with a kitchen knife, when you've got a gun and you're a grown man, you shouldn't be a cop.
It's bothered that no one is asking what could have scared a 16-year-old girl enough that she felt she had to grab a kitchen knife facing two adult women, right? People are just, no one's asking what would have scared a kid who's in a foster situation so much that she felt that she needed to defend herself or pick up a knife. Like, no one's asking that about her. By definition, if police are being called, then something has taken place that is either criminal, right, or is either frightening to someone in the community. And that's whether the person is white or Black. So don't give me the, police didn't have a choice. If they're being called to a situation where they believe a crime is committed, that's true whether the person is white or Black. But we have seen police tussle with and beg white defendants who even have a gun, who even have a knife, because in that case, too, somebody was called because something was criminal. And they seem to have figured out an alternative to killing that person. Kyle Rittenhouse, the police knew he just shot two people.
When a cop sees someone trying to murder another person, the cop's job is to stop that. We have a legal system for adjudication. The cop is supposed to protect members of the community from being murdered right in front of them. It's hard to put more nonsense in one response to this incident. It's just how shameless they are about lying. They've seen the video, but they speak about it as if the video shows something totally different than it shows. The videos are unambiguous. They're clear. You couldn't mistake them. There's not multiple ways to interpret these videos. And then you hear them make this argument that they make all the time, that white people get taken into custody by police while Black people get killed. White people get taken into custody because they cooperate with police. When activists like Joy Reid go around telling Black people the cops are white supremacists who go around murdering Blacks for no reason, that only increases that trend, because once a Black person is caught by police, they respond violently because they think the cop's a white supremacist who's going to kill them, and then they end up getting themselves killed.
After these findings were announced, Kentucky Attorney General Daniel Cameron, who, by the way, is a protege of Senator Mitch McConnell, who was at his wedding in early August, called Breonna's death a tragedy, as if her death were akin to a drowning or an accident or being hit by a bus. Today's ruling states that in legal terms, Breonna Taylor's life did not matter. That message was heard loud and clear, and not just by Black Kentuckians, but let's face it, by Black Americans everywhere, that according to the theory of the law that was voiced today by Attorney General Cameron, police have the perfect right to bust into your home in the middle of the night if you have any association with someone police are looking for, even if they've already found them.
The police had a warrant, so yeah, they can bust into your home in the middle of the night with a warrant.
And they can shoot and kill you in your bed and walk away with no legal repercussions.
Breonna Taylor was not killed in her bed. Again, this is a narrative that has been debunked a million times. She was standing in the hallway when her boyfriend shot a police officer. And surprise, the police shot back.
And the only problem that these police will have is if they don't aim properly at you and they endanger your neighbors. And about that right to bear arms and defend yourself in your home, well, you know, that good old conservative rallying cry, Second Amendment. Oh, that doesn't apply to Black people. Sorry. The rule of law, that doesn't apply to Black people. Justice, that doesn't apply to Black people. That was the message that we heard from the state of Kentucky today.
Black people don't have Second Amendment rights? You can murder Black people? I don't know what she's talking about, but it doesn't matter because she can just say anything because she's a sociopathic liar.
Next, we've seen an alarming increase in violence directed at Asian Americans since the start of the pandemic. You don't suppose the former president repeatedly calling it, quote, the China virus had anything to do with that, do you?
It is not Trump's fault that Black people, mostly in Democrat-controlled cities like San Francisco and New York, are beating the crap out of Asians.
Anti-Asian racism is not new in this country. In the 19th century, similar xenophobic sentiments led to the passage of the Chinese Exclusion Act, barring immigration based solely on race. And I'll go to you first, I guess, Congressman. How much can we connect the rash of violence against Asian Americans to the previous president's rhetoric about the coronavirus? How much can we connect the rash of violence against Asian Americans to the previous president's rhetoric about the coronavirus? How much can we connect the rash of violence against Asian Americans to the previous president's rhetoric about the coronavirus? The Republican obsession with falsifying our nation's history continues, with nearly a dozen states, including introducing GOP-backed bills that would ban schools from teaching critical race theory, a decades-old academic concept that examines systemic racism. It's the latest issue conservatives are fixated on. And as with Antifa or democracy, they don't seem to understand what it is. Accuracy doesn't seem to matter to this party, now does it? Now, this war against a clear-eyed, factual understanding of our history, which is all critical race theory is, it's a war against our press freedoms, too. Hannah Jones is a MacArthur Genius and Pulitzer Prize winner. She's the creator of the 1619 Project, a New York Times Magazine project that situates slavery and race at the center of this nation's history and narrative where, frankly, it has always belonged. It's a project that conservatives despise, calling it propaganda because it dares to address slavery and asks you to not look away. The 1619 Project means different things to different people. For some, including myself, it's a phenomenal piece of journalism challenging us to reframe U.S. history by centering the legacy of Black Americans, starting with the arrival of the first enslaved Africans in 1619. While for others, including many Republicans and one Florida blogger, it is ideological poison threatening to turn impressionable children against America. The reason she wouldn't get tenure is because some conservatives are offended about the way that she's doing journalism and history because she won't do the sing-song, rose-colored glasses, America's perfect, in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue BS that has been taught. It strikes me that what the right is trying to do here is to chill, as you said, not just academic freedom, but to scare young journalists, to say, you don't want to write about the history of the United States the way we don't like it. You don't want to tell stories that make us feel uncomfortable about our history, because we can punish you. We can punish you in your next pursuit when you want to get a teaching job. That is totalitarian to me. Then there's Texas Governor Greg Abbott writing that Dr. King inspired hope in our nation and that beacon of hope and liberty still burns bright in Texas. How nice. Except for the fact that he literally signed a bill that eliminated the requirement for schools to teach anything about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. It's about getting out the Republican vote by riling up white voters. It's about selling white grievance and rage. The same rage that produces attacks on Asian Americans and Jewish people and on our capital. Rather than fight inflation, let's howl over critical race theory. Instead of COVID relief, let's demonize China and masks and vaccines. Rather than policy, let's give them anger, racialized anger.
Well, it's a pretty good encapsulation of American conservatism in 2021. You know, it's not about these ideas. It is about owning the libs. As you mentioned a little bit earlier, it's about, constantly feeding that outrage machine. I mean, it is a little bit like watching an addict, figuring, how can we stoke it up? We need to come up with something more outrageous.
No, you wrote a book called What's the Matter with White People? And I think it answers Charlie's question, because the outrage from the Tea Party wasn't about deficits. It was about the black
Joe
guy.
Biden is white, so they're not out there in their funny hats and their American founder costumes with, hideous racist pictures of Obama. It was never about the debt.
And the things that a lot of white working class people used to really cherish, they now hate because they just associate it with black people. And they say that the things that saved their own families throughout the 1940s and 50s are all now welfare. And they're all bad because diverse people get access to them. Isn't basically that's all there is? That's why Fox News is in the outrage business, because they're just like mad at people who aren't white Christians.
Well, they're clearly mad, and they want to keep people mad. They want to keep people outraged and convince their victims. You can almost sense this. Well, they're clearly mad, and they want to keep people mad. They want to keep people outraged and convince their victims.
Did you hear that? It's Republicans creating the outrage machine. Did they forget the last 4 years? Again? No, they're just liars. Everything about Democrat politics is about oppressed, oppressor, victimhood. It's anointing victimhood to all. Everybody who is not a straight white male is a victim of straight white males. And the whole purpose of the propaganda they push is to make you outraged, make you hate your country, and make you believe that the country needs to be completely overhauled and reformed because the founders were racist. Christopher Columbus was a genocidal maniac, and therefore they have no credibility and just get rid of everything.
Tomorrow, President Biden is going to speak, and there's a question of whether or not he actually can change this or he can alter it at all, because unbelievably, he has become, for Republicans, as much of a sort of figure of hatred, a hate object, as President Obama was. The black president. He was his vice president. Maybe that's part of it. I don't know what it is, but
it's so strange. It doesn't make any sense. Joe Biden's getting as much hate as Barack Obama, but those Republicans only hated Obama because he's black, and yet they hate Joe Biden just as much. I guess it's got to be because Joe Biden's kind of black. That's her conclusion, effectively. I'm only slightly exaggerating. It doesn't make any sense that Republicans would be just as hard on this Democrat president as they were on the last Democrat president, because her premise is that they only hated the last Democrat president, not because of his political views or all the terrible things he did, but because of the color of his skin. So the only way to resolve this tension, there are two ways. She could either recognize that Republicans did not hate Obama because he was black. They didn't like Barack Obama because he was a jerk and a terrible president and did all sorts of horrible things. Or she could conclude that Joe Biden is somehow kind of black, or is associated, Joe Biden, who's a very white guy, is somehow kind of sort of black. When reality runs contrary to the racial narrative, her answer is to change reality. When reality runs contrary to the racial narrative, her answer is to change reality.